A new take on impressions. Of the three forms of sustenance that enter the human mechanism, impressions in the top compartment, air in the second, and everyday food or drink in the lowest, this work constantly emphasizes that the food of impressions is the most important food group. A human being on hunger strike can go without food for around 60 days, water for about 7, the average person can hold their breath for 7 or 8 minutes, maybe 9. Then it has been confirmed through the use of sensory deprivation tanks that the human mind cannot remain lucid without incoming impressions for more than a few seconds before we begin to hallucinate and create our own. One needs to understand that from a work point of view, impressions are critical. Ordinarily, people in the walk of life can live with regular food and air, along with very few impressions. However, if an individual begins to work on themselves, then they must reflect upon what it means to take in more impressions. One way to accomplish this is to try to look at things without association, which is an interesting method of approach. Another way is to see everything happening through life in the light of this work, in other words, to bring your work up to the place of incoming impressions. In addition to this, we can examine personality acting within ourselves, and find as we move along the path of this work that there are many ways of taking in impressions to greater extent. However, remember that everything tends to become mechanical through time, even what might at first be felt deeply. And in consequence, if we can find a way of taking in impressions more fully, then we ought not expect that to yield sustained results. One has to work smarter and tend to a number of irons in the fire, as Ouspensky remarked, using different methods and approaches at different times. If we could make personality passive, which is a big if, then impressions would fall on essence that lies behind personality. This would give us a great deal of force, as everything would look fresher, more brilliant, and much more interesting. However, as we are mechanical, we cease to take in new impressions, starting from an early stage in our lives. Observe an infant exploring their world. Then as they grow older and more used to things, their amusements cease to satisfy and accumulate in the cupboard instead. This happens because they take in the same impressions over and over again, see everything in exactly the same way, and take everyone that is familiar with exactly the same frame of reference. Of course, if we could manage to see a person we know without any associations, then we would receive quite a shock, seeing quite a different person. In the same way, if we begin to see ourselves, if we can get behind ourselves through self-observation, then we will again get a shock, realizing we do not know ourselves at all and are quite different from what we had assumed and spoken of publicly all this time. Recall an esoteric phrase in the Gospels, where Christ talks about what is necessary for work on oneself. He is really speaking about personality, where he says, "Whosoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, he shall in no wise enter therein." See Luke, chapter 18, verse 17. Here the idea of this work must be considered, and the practice of becoming more conscious. Taking personality as the acquired part of us, recall one or two things. That everyone has a certain built-up personality, with its own viewpoints, its own likes and dislikes, customs, attitudes, and so on. Can any of us really see that we have a machine constructed like this over a period of time, and that what is considered as you could perhaps be better described as it? In each country, quite different kinds of personality become ingrained among their populace. A Chinese is quite different from an Englishman, a Muslim quite different from an American, and yet each will take their personality as absolute truth, absolute right, and be prepared even to die defending it. If we could but catch a glimpse of what is meant in these commentaries, then it may help to see what personality truly is in ourselves. If personality could be rendered more passive, then impressions can begin to fall upon essence. This makes it possible for essence to grow, which rewards us with an extraordinary experience of expanded conscious awareness. Regrettably though, as long as impressions fall on personality, they will always produce the same effects mechanically, and always lead to the same outcomes. But when they begin to fall on essence, everything is transformed, becoming new and far richer, more varied and enlightening. Everything becomes wonderful, and instead of having the feeling of repeating themselves, where things are always the same, we begin to feel that nothing is ever quite the same. One condition necessary, however, is that we live more in the moment, noticing those forces coming into each moment, and so taking in impressions from the eternal now. If we are always living in imagination, in the past or some contrived future, then this is not possible. When we remain in personality and only react in set, stereotypical and mechanical ways to every moment, we soon feel a strange staleness, a dead emptiness in ourselves, and complain that life somehow lacks any meaning for us. This is because we are making no attempt to take in new impressions, and are really cloaked in a personality that has been formed in us since adolescence, which we think of as ourself. The most interesting thing is that people will exclaim, "How can I think differently? How can I feel differently?" when this is actually the whole point of this work. If you are unable to observe how you react, then nothing can change for you. If you cannot or will not take in any new ideas, then nothing can ever change. If you think that you can retain your former way of thinking, feeling, and estimating things about life, and everyone that you encounter along your journey, then simply add some new accessory to yourself such as you are. Then again things, and you, cannot magically transform, just as a new hat and scarf will not change the kind of person that you are each day. It is you that has to change, and you are just how you mechanically think or feel about everything. That is, after all, precisely what you have become. So begin to observe that persona, the person who thinks, feels, and acts as it always does. And then ask yourself in the quiet of night when you are alone and lying in your bed, are you satisfied with that acquired you, and with the way it experiences life?